Continuing this series looking at the latest wave of classic series Doctor Who figure sets exclusive to B&M in the UK, I'll be taking a look at the Five Doctors set. Before I move on to actually review this set, I thought I'd share my thoughts with you around it because I have pretty mixed feelings about the lineup in this set. On the one hand, I think it's fantastic that we're having an 80s story being represented because there's so few figures released in this line that represents this era. That said, I think if you're going to do a Five Doctors set, I wish they'd used a little bit more imagination and actually used it as an opportunity to release the Anthony Ainley Master. This figure has been on my wish list for a very long time, and I'm sure there's many other fans out there who would agree. So whilst overall I'm pretty pleased about this set, I think it's one of the more exciting ones in this wave, I am disappointed that they didn't use it as an opportunity to give us either a new companion or, like I said, Anthony Ainley Master. That would have been fantastic. Instead, we've kind of essentially got tweaks or variants of figures that we've already had in the past. And I don't mind this because obviously they're keeping the price point low with these figures, so I understand that in order to do that, they've got to recycle certain figures and molds, but I think there should be something dramatically different in each release that justifies it. And in one sense we do have that because, as you'll see, we do have the Raston Robot, which is the first time we've seen this character in action figure form, which is brilliant. But as I say, I would much rather they'd given us a new companion or the Anthony Ainley Master. But with that said, let's move on to the review. The packaging should be very familiar to those who've been collecting these figures. It is essentially one big window display with the standard Doctor Who logo, which is the current series logo, with the blue bars and the grey TARDIS that we see in the branding. As I've noted before, I tend to find this branding a little bit dull, a little bit unimaginative, and it's not very colourful or exciting. But that said, given that most of the packaging is given over to the window display, that's where it really comes alive, and I think they are very displayable. I do like this format. When we look at the reverse, we just have an image of the three figures, and that's about it. It's pretty dull, pretty uninspired, and this isn't really that exciting, to be honest. That said, these figures do come with this inlay, which is absolutely fantastic. I love this. This is an image from the show, of course. This is where we meet the Raston Robot for the first time outside this cave, and I think this is a really nice touch. Of course, you can take this out and use this as a diorama. Moving on to the figures themselves, first up we have the Third Doctor, and I have to say I'm really glad to have this variant. It's quite a colourful look for the Third Doctor, and it's been a while since we've seen him with his overcoat. They have just utilised the same head sculpt that we've seen on all the other Third Doctors, so it's a shame that we haven't got a different one because it'd be really great to have a Third Doctor with a different expression. And in this case in particular, obviously John Pertwee was significantly older when he returned to the role here, so it maybe if they'd done a slightly different mould for this would have been more exciting. But that being said, this is still a pretty solid mould. I've always really liked it. I thought it's got a really good likeness of John Pertwee, and you can see they've taken efforts there to put a wash through his hair to make it look a little bit more authentic and real, and we can see here as well that his costume is nicely replicated to what we see on screen, so I think they've done a pretty nice job of this. I really like the paint apps on this costume. I think they've done a really nice job. It's a deeper, a darker, sort of more maroon shade, and there's the lovely piping going around the front of the jacket there in that lighter colour, which just gives it a little bit of extra depth and texture, and I think that works really well. Likewise, it's nice to have a Pertwee with the open collar at the top over the cravat there, which is quite cool, and also the paint applications on the overcoat are relatively simple in that crosshatch, but it works and I think it's quite effective. Also, I am really pleased to say that it's actually made out of a really soft rubber, so it's very malleable this time around. When we've had it in the past, it's been sort of a harder plastic and it's been much harder to remove the coat, but here it's a doddle, and this provides an opportunity to have two different looks for this figure, with or without the jacket. Now, I think it actually looks better with the overcoat, but nevertheless, it is kind of cool to have both options open to us. Sadly, there's nothing new in the articulation scheme. Again, as I said in the previous video, I think they've missed a trick here to actually enhance the articulation of these figures, particularly in the shoulder, where we do know they have that joint now where the shoulders can kick up and out on that hinge, that ball joint, so it's a real shame they don't utilise this on some of the classic Doctors, because I think they desperately need it. But that said, he's got the swivel at the neck, he's got the swivel at the shoulder, he's got the upper bicep swivel, he's got the single jointed elbow, and of course he's got the swivel at the wrist. He's also got a swivel there at the waist, and there's no problems with this at all. He's got the hinge hips, of course his legs kick out, there's the upper thigh swivel as well, and of course the legs can kick forwards and backwards. And they're supported by a single jointed knee. One thing I did notice, which I thought I should probably point out, with some of these B&M sets, sometimes the figures have a much more rubbery feeling to the joints. This is certainly true here. It's not in a bad way, it doesn't feel like the joints are loose in any way, but they definitely feel a lot softer when you move them, so something to be aware of, but certainly nothing to complain about in this instance. So overall, I think this is a pretty solid figure. I really like what they've done with this. Next up we have the Raston Robot, and as I said, this is the first time we've had a figure of the Raston Robot from any scale, from any figure line ever, so this is really quite exciting to have this character, and it's one I've always really liked from this story, because it's the only time we ever see the character, and there's something kind of creepy and unusual and unique about it. There's not an awful lot to comment on when it comes to Sculpt. This is a brand new head sculpt. We've not seen this before, although we do see it in another set in this wave, but I'll save that for another video. But what we have here is pretty authentic to what we see on screen. I think they've done a pretty nice job of it in terms of the paint. It looks very shiny. The head in particular really reflects the light nicely. Naturally, there's not an awful lot of detail when it comes to the body of this character either. What we can tell, of course, is that this has been recycled from the Vord figures that were released earlier this year. But he does come with some unique hands, which is something we haven't seen before. He has got them arced there in that way that looks almost like a Vulcan salute, but it's not. It's how he poses his hands when he's about to shoot one of those spikes. And on that note, I think it's a shame that we don't get that as an accessory. We don't get one of the spikes as a prop. In fact, it was my brother who suggested it'd be really cool if they'd done a Cyberman with the spike going through him. That would have made a really cool, quite exciting army building opportunity. And it would have made an opportunity to have a Cyberman that was distinctly different and quite interesting visually in the set. One little detail that they have given him though is the dirt on his shoes. I think this is a nice touch, and it's these little details that make all the difference. Now, he does fare a lot better when it comes to the articulation. Of course, he's got the swivel at the neck there, which works perfectly fine, but crucially, he's got that ball joint in the shoulder, which allows his arms to go forwards and backwards, but also kick out, which is just, it makes such a huge difference to the articulation range in these figures, which is fantastic. Otherwise, he's got the upper bicep swivel, the single jointed elbow, the swivel at the wrist, and of course, the swivel at the waist. He's also got the hinge hips, of course the legs go right the way out there, and he's got the upper thigh swivel to support it. The legs can kick forwards, they can also go backwards a little bit, and he's got the single jointed knee. Overall, a pretty cool figure, a nice character to add to the collection, and as I said, the articulation scheme is really solid on this figure, and the sculpt is nicely rendered too. So all in all, I think he's earned his 4 stars. And finally, we have the Cyberman, or in this case, the Cyberleader. And that's because there's 2 versions of this set. One with a bog standard Earthshock Cyberman, and the other with the Cyberleader. The key difference between them, of course, is all in the ears or the handlebars. The standard silver is the generic Cyberman that's been released many times, and this here is the first time we have the black-eared or Cyberleader. I'm really pleased to finally have the Cyberleader. We've had, of course, many releases of the standard Earthshock Cyberman across the years, but this is the first time we've actually had the Cyberleader. Other than that, there's nothing really different about this release. The body mould and the paint apps are identical to all the other previous releases, and whilst I'm really pleased to finally have the Cyberleader with, of course, the black handlebars, I am a little bit disappointed they didn't do something a bit more interesting or imaginative. A battle-damaged Cyberman, as my brother described, would have been absolutely fantastic, but sadly, that wasn't meant to be. And whilst I've always loved this figure, it isn't the best when it comes to articulation. Sadly, there's no articulation whatsoever in the head, it doesn't even swivel from side to side, and of course it has the same shoulders which just swivel up and down, no ball joint there, which again, missed a trick here to do something a little bit different, a bit more interesting with this figure, which is a shame. He does still have the basic swivels in the arms and the wrists, and of course at the waist, and of course he does have the hinge hips, which are great. They kick out to the side there, they kick forwards and backwards, and of course they bend at the knee to 90 degrees. And he's also got a swivel at the boot as well, which is pretty cool, but I do wish they just tweaked this shoulder articulation. He does at least come with his standard cyber weapon here, which is pretty cool. It's a nice sculpt, it's nicely painted, and I'm glad to have this prop included, which fits nicely in his grip there and looks pretty cool. Feels like he's finished, he looks good. So overall, this is a pretty nice figure. There's not a lot going on when it comes to the paint apps, but there's enough detail here to make him interesting, pretty screen accurate, which is great. And as I said, I'm really glad to finally have the Cyberleader, which is really cool. But other than that, there's definitely drawbacks to this figure. Having the lack of articulation in the head is a shame, but overall, it's a pretty solid release. In conclusion, and I think this is probably one of the more exciting sets in this wave, it's really nice to have that variance of the Third Doctor. I think one of the final variants we've not had, so it's really cool to finally have him. I really like having the Cyberleader at long last, and of course the standout would be the Raston Robot. But despite all this good stuff, there's still a part of me that can't escape the feeling that's just, I wish they'd just done something slightly different. If they just replaced one of these figures with the Anthony Ainley Master or maybe a companion, it would have made this a lot more special. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.